So, good evening, all of you, and welcome to my teacher, my mentor, Professor Arun Kumar Patnaik from Hyderabad University. And we have another eminent personality who is also a professor of in this region, GMU, Gangadhar Meher University, Professor Gyanaranjan Swai. He is also the student of Professor Patnaik, and I mean, including Professor Patnaik, and Professor Swine, uh, we have interest in the theory. And sir, you are most welcome to this evening. And my students, I think almost from 35 participants, most of them are my students in this. They are in PG first semester, and I take the risk of saying it that I find them good student. This batch is actually it is consisting of good students, and also there are students of my brother Gyano Bhai uh, from GMU students are there. So mostly, overall, this is the western part of Odisha. Almost all participants, belonging to western part of Odisha. And to my students, I must mention that, I did my master in Hyderabad University, and I did my MPhil with Professor Patnaik. And from my PG days till now, I always, find him a true friend, a true philosopher, and true guide. And whatever I have learned from him, and whatever I am, showing any attitude or giving any knowledge, I'm always inspired by his, practical wisdom and his theoretical, knowledge. Now to this topic, actually, I was teaching the topic. The title is that from classical Marxism to Orthodox Communism, a continuity with a departure, right? And actually, I thought about this topic while teaching my PG students regarding, Marxism as a, variant of political ideology. There I found that there is difference between, Marxism as a social philosophy. Mostly it is derived from the, classical writing of the Karl Marx, and the phenomena of 20th century communism, what is popularly called orthodox communism. And in that book, I'm just forgetting the author's name. I have written in my notes. And in that book, the author is writing like this: the collapse of communism may not be seen as the death of Marxism. Rather, it gives a fresh and new life to the Marxism. The main reason of this collapse is the departure of communism from Marxism in many ways. So here I, a natural, inquisitive that comes to my mind. What is that departure, right? And then I, talked with my sir. He said how to understand that, departure. Then sir told that it's not complete departure. I think there are similarities, there are dissimilarities, right? So orthodox communism, in some ways it has derived something from the classical Marxism, but then it departed from it, right? Uh, so today, I request my mentor, my teacher, to make us understand that continuity, that departure, the interrelation between the classical Marxism and orthodox communism, and uh, the divergence between these, two tradition, especially why orthodox communism, it collapsed with the disintegration of USSR. Or today, can we think about Marxism, especially in this, capitalist system of, capitalist political system or economic system? Can we think of Marxism today as an ideology, or what is the significance of Marxism today for entire world? So I welcome you, sir. I hope that your talk will give us insight, and and it will give insight to our student as well. Now, to my students, now they can listen to a professor from University of Hyderabad, and Professor Patnaik is also the Dean of School of Social Science, University of Hyderabad. Sir, right now over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Himansu. I must today's topic is classical Marxism and Orthodox communism, continuity and departure. There are many people who think that Orthodox communism distorted classical Marxism and made it irrelevant. That means theoretically classical Marxism seems to be all right for them. Only practically it has failed because the Orthodox communism distorted it. This view is partly true, partly not true. I do not completely agree with this view because this is that more or less those who are, in my view, they are trying to bail out classical Marxism and its theoretical strength, and they are prepared to concede practical weaknesses, but they are not prepared to recognize that even theoretically there are deficits in classical Marxism. Therefore, I tend to disagree with this view. There's another view that says that both classical Marxism and Orthodox communism, they are one and same. Therefore, there is no point in separating them. That is again another extreme view, and it is not possible to club them together apart from the time period that separates them and also context that separates them. There are also interesting differences in that in the theory of practice and practical implications of theory. Classical Marxism is more a theory dominated enterprise, and Orthodox communism is more a practical oriented, but in both you have theory and practice. So therefore there are subtle differences between them. You can't simply club them together and say that Orthodox communism is a continuation of classical Marxism. Therefore, there is hardly any difference between them. Therefore, I take a middle ground view, so that it is necessary to understand things in their complexities. So I will probably speak for half an hour, 40 minutes. Then we'll have a discussion. I want your feedback and a discussion, especially Professor Sonnamay Tripathi, Professor Gyanranjan are present. I would like to take their feedback. Since all of you are familiar with some versions of Marxism or Marxist theory through your PA honors and also other courses in MA, you should be aware of some tenets of Marxism. I will not go into that detail, but I will tell you briefly what classical Marxism represents. Classical Marxism, essentially, if you see carefully, it has a two-dimensional view of society. That's where his weakness, his strength and weakness lies. It understands class relations quite well. It understands class relations relation to the in relation to modern societies quite well. It doesn't examine existence of classes in the pre-modern society, but examines the nature of class relation in the modern society. So the contemporary society is better examined by classical Marxism, but examines only class relations in contemporary society. And also then it talks about state. unfortunately could not develop a theory of the state. Marx himself proposes a separate volume on the state while writing his Capital volume 1, 2, 3. Volume 1 was published by him. Volume 2 and 3 published by Engels. So anyway, incomplete. The two volumes were incomplete. But he talked about economic aspects of capitalism rather than political aspects of capitalism. Therefore, the idea of state is present, but he wanted to write a separate volume on the state. That mission was incomplete because he died in between. Therefore, he could not write that volume on the state power. So, but point is, in terms of their theoretical landscape, classical Marxism of both Marx and Engels, especially, founded two important units of society. One, they tried to examine classes, and second, they tried to examine state. They reflect on the state. They spoke about state. Engels wrote a volume on state, state, family, and private property. If you recall that volume, that deals with the state. And also talks about family. So, therefore, the two important concepts are used by classical Marxism, that is state and class. The concept of civil society is missing in classical Marxism. That's actually improvisation made by Gramsci in 1920s and 30s. So Gramsci's take is a bit of classical Marxism, a bit of post-war, pre-war and post-war Marxism. He anticipates post-war developments in a different way, but only his intervention in the Marxist camp highlights three-dimensional view of society: state, civil society, and classes. For Gramsci, there are three. Every society has three dimensions. He offers a three-dimensional view of society. But three-dimensional view of society is missing in the classical Marxism. Classical Marxism offers a two-dimensional view of society. That's the first point. And what do you mean by class? Classes are defined in terms of means of production. Depending on what kind of property structure is there, classes are defined. So those who own means of production, those who own factories and implements in production, in agriculture and urban production, they are the owners of means of production, and they are the what they call, what classical Marxism calls, they are the members of ruling class. They may not represent themselves in the state power, but they control the state through a politics of representation. So therefore, the state leaders come from within the owners of means of production. So therefore, they and the owners of means of production, their interests are protected by the state power. So state power tries to safeguard their interests, and the state power tries to counterbalance the class conflict in favor of the ruling classes, in favor of the property classes. So this is essentially the political economic scheme of classical Marxism. So for classical Marxism, history of society, history of class struggle, and state essentially acts like the executive agency of the property owners, and tries to normalize class contradiction in favor of property classes, because they come from within the property classes, and therefore they modulate their relation, their contradiction between the haves and have-nots, between the rich and the poor, between the owners of means of production and those who don't own. So the poor don't own means of production. Now this is the usual scheme followed by classical Marxism. In this, there is no notion of civil society. There is no notion of the civil society network of organizations. If you understand, they refer to large number of non-economic and non-state agencies. They are not necessarily identical with state, not necessarily identical with classes, but they are connected with state and classes, but they retain their independent existence in society. Therefore, the third variable present in the modern society. That's where Gramsci comes in. Gramsci's contribution is very enlightening and very refreshing. Civil society basically means a network of private organizations seeking autonomy from classes on the one hand and state power on the other hand. Therefore, they create a third space, third independent, not neutral, but independent space. For Gramsci, no neutral space. Everything is connected with power. Therefore, every space is a power relation for him. Therefore, liberals assume that civil society is actually a neutral space, which is power neutral. Power actually is embodied in state power rather than in the civil society institutions. What are the civil society institutions? They are essentially institutions that safeguard human rights of people. And what are they? Education. That safeguards education rights. Religious organizations. That safeguard religious freedom. There are varieties here, and all these varieties represent autonomy. They represent they believe in non-interference. They do expect state not to interfere in their freedom. They expect each other to respect each other's freedom. Therefore, they create a democratic atmosphere. Liberals for a long time believe that, even now they believe that this because of civil society, state is democratic. If you read Locke carefully, in second treatise, Locke says clearly, democracy exists because of civil society. Democratic state is democratic because of civil society. He says, quote him, without civil society, there would be monarchical power. The brilliant statement made by John Locke. Gramsci would agree with that view from the left point of view. All liberals would agree with John Locke from liberal point of view. So, but that's where the classical Marxism is weak. Classical Marxism could not examine how the forces of democracy operate in modern society. It talked about human rights, etc., etc. But Marx was quite contemptuous of human rights. He thought that human rights, in capital, he says human rights plus Bentham plus private property make up capitalism, which is partly true, but partly not true. Because human rights as a movement also manifests in civil society. Marx had no idea of civil society. Gramsci says that Marx could not read civil society carefully, and he therefore has no notion of series network of communities in modern society, modern communities created by capitalism, trying to harness various forms of freedom, cultural freedom, educational freedom, religious freedom, civic freedom. Therefore, this Marx theory of freedom is bit more mechanical, and then tries to reduce everything to class relation. And Gramsci is critical of Marx for reducing everything in field of politics to class to production sector. So that's the point he makes in his notebooks. But he says with Marx that capitalism has produced inequalities that must be critiqued, that must be critically examined and critically reformed. So therefore, that's he shares with Marx, but however, he disagrees with Marx, the very poor understanding of civil society. That poverty of understanding civil society, which is their integral part of classical Marxism, came to haunt the orthodox Marxism. Years later, when Gramsci was alive in the prison when he was arrested, he was witnessing the rise of Orthodox Marxism in his own party. He was a communist himself, and Italy, and he realized that even the Russian Marxism has gone overboard, and it has become very, very orthodox. It's become intolerant of dissent. It become intolerant of freedom. It has one thing it suppressed is the cry for liberty. So therefore, it produced some kind of some version of Marxism, which is theoretically reductionist and politically repressive. Reductionist theory remains politically repressive. The practical implication of a reductionist theory is that it always will be repressive. That's why theoretically we call it reductionism. A reductionist theory is always politically repressive. This point you must remember. And therefore we should be critical of reductionism of different kinds and recognize their strength. Every theory has a strength. Marxism has also a strength. It remains a very modern critical, it gives us a modern critical view of capitalism. Capitalism is not so good. It has inhuman face. It has dehumanized society. It has dehumanized nature. Therefore, this humanistic critique of capitalism is there in Marx, from early Marx to old Marx. He talks about various forms of alienation that capitalism has produced, and therefore we must create a society which connects people rather than alienates them. That theme of Marx is deeply influencing, is impacted large number of people who are not necessarily Marxists. And but that is because he offers a very systematic and modern critique of alienation, and gives us hope that we must struggle to improve the capitalist society and make it a better human society, human-run society. Therefore, to the extent capitalism exists in our time, critique of capitalism will come from Marx and Marxism. The question is, will that critique be acceptable to people? If there is no theory of democracy, there is no theory of civil society, will that critique be acceptable? That's where Gramsci's contribution comes, in my view. So what happened in the Orthodox Marxism or Orthodox communism? Orthodox communism took the slogans of Marx: productive force, production relation, mode of production, and state power. State power is the executive agency of ruling class, and then carried out in practice. Now, once this reductionist theory is carried out in practice, it will create havoc. And it has created havoc throughout the world. Reason why most of the Marxists are wary of freedom is because of this. They may operate in fact, one of the human rights leaders who died here in Hyderabad long back, K. Balgopal, argues quite clearly that one of the weakness of Marxism is that it has no theory of freedom, because it talks about freedom. It talks about freedom as a normative goal of society, but freedom must be sustained by institutions. And freedom is more not a nebulous. Freedom has a diversity. Freedom also has varieties, various forms of freedom. You can't simply compress them in one. I may not be interested in your freedom. I may be interested in my freedom. You may be interested in cultural freedom. I may be interested in education freedom. And therefore, somebody else may be interested in religious freedom. People are interested in varieties of freedom. And therefore, you cannot give a nebulous idea of freedom and say that we should create a society that connects us and creates a human society free from problems of alienation and suffering. That won't, that normatively it is attractive idea, I agree. But question is, You can't build a new society on the basis of purely normative idea. You must have institutions to protect, safeguard freedom. Liberal, one good thing about liberal theory is that it has created institutions to protect freedoms. And if you don't agree with that, you can't give them up. You must internally critique that and transform it from within, not abolish them. And therefore, classical Marxism talked about evolution of freedom institutions. It believed in evolution of religion, believed in evolution of state, evolution. Civil society was not there anyway, so civil society got abolished theoretically. But whatever they recognize, believed in abolishing them. So this is what was written by Orthodox communism. Orthodox communism carried out that logic to extreme, and push the limits of classical Marxism to practical extremes. As a result, one of the hallmark of Soviet socialism and Soviet-inspired socialist movements throughout the world, the communist parties across the world who modulated themselves after the Bolshevik Marxism, Leninism, so on and so forth, have no theory of freedom, no notion of freedom. A very weak understanding of human rights, a reductionist understanding of rights. They thought that people are only those who are private property, they talk about rights because they want to safeguard their private property. Marx himself defined that those who talk about property defend their private property. Therefore, they are talking like Bentham. So that's partly true, but partly not true. The history of human rights, if you see carefully, it has come from all sides. It's true that private property owners defended their rights against feudal assault. But then they produced varieties of institutions to safeguard them. Therefore, you can't simply define human rights in terms of private property owners. Therefore, this human rights discourse must be understood in relation to institutional development in civil society. Each institution is trying to protect one set of human rights in civil society, which I already narrated to. Therefore, and then there are varieties within that. Therefore, it is important for a radical theory which is interested to critique capitalism and rebuild a new society, to defend institutions which are meant to safeguard human rights of different kinds. Diversities in freedom, diversities in human rights are to be recognized by a radical theory. Now, this is the point which is lacking in the classical Marxism and Orthodox communism. Orthodox communism became more repressive than classical Marxism because I tell you why there is a difference. The difference is subtle. It's true that there is similarity. Weakness of classical Marxism was utilized by Orthodox communism, and it became further weak. But there is a subtle difference. Difference is this: the normatively, as I told you, theory cannot be simply equated with any practical things. But theoretical structure may be having its own autonomy. As a result, it is necessary to understand theory in terms of its own claims, and practical consequences cannot be fully attributed to theoretical stance, which also separates them in time. Classical Marxism is a product of 19th century Europe, whereas Orthodox communism product of 20th century Europe, early 20th century Russia, and Russia is half Europe, half Asia. Therefore, that spread globally from Russia, where party became everything, state became everything, and ended up worshipping state, and they bureaucratized society, And therefore, it went beyond the expectations of classical Marxism. Classical Marxism didn't want the society to be bureaucratized, didn't want society to, they wanted society to democratize, but how to go about that democracy, they had no idea. Maybe, as Marx says, they were busy in identifying the class questions because capitalism was assumed to be a natural outcome of human history. Therefore, Marx was primarily bothered about questioning that, arguing that capitalism has history too, and it will also remain only a historical force. It is not a natural outcome of human civilization. Therefore, it has to disappear over a period of time. So, Marx himself revised his ideas gradually towards end of his life. He argued that evolution idea doesn't work. People won't subscribe to evolution idea, essentially anarchist syndrome. Therefore, it is important for for us to understand that people may incrementally approach towards a society that believes in development of capacities of every individual. And therefore, he gave interesting ideas, and those ideas were not followed by orthodox communism. Therefore, in terms of theory, there is a difference. Marx thought that socialism should develop capacities of individuals. The inherent capacities of individual must be developed by socialists. Therefore, every form of socialist strategy adopted by socialist state must promote capacities of each individual. When under capitalism, capacities of the property owners are developed. They have capacity to do varieties of things. Therefore, they breathe freedom. The entire spectrum of freedom is limited to the property owners. They enjoy more freedom because they own property. But it's true that non-property owners also have freedom. For example, non-property owners have civic freedom. They have also political freedom, but they lack economic freedom because they lack property. Therefore, a common or private property, they lack either of them. Therefore, they lack economic freedom. And in the absence of economic freedom, you enjoy limited political freedom, in the limited cultural freedom, limited civic freedom. The scope of freedom you enjoy, but that is gets restricted because you don't enjoy economic freedom. Therefore, that argument in classical Marxism is valid, but in the mm, in the in the fold of orthodox communism, this entire spectrum, the normative idea of normative emphasis of socialism, targeting the capacity development of each individual, was underplayed. Therefore, in my view, there is a subtle difference between Marx's emphasis on socialism and the orthodox communism, its emphasis on socialism. Orthodox communism believed in the first phase of post-socialist society, which was primarily concerned with socialism. Then they said that we'll develop communism later. But what did they do? Did they develop capacity of individuals? They did to some extent. They developed individuals in everybody got some kind of employment. It's true that it did ensure that some kind of employment was ensured by orthodox communism. But then employment is not everything. In bread, as somebody said, bread is not everything for human life. Freedom is equally important. Not just bread, but also freedom. Now, therefore, the aspects of freedom were completely undermined by orthodox communism. But normatively, the focus on freedom is not lost in orthodox Marxism or classical Marxism. Classical Marxism has also a bit of orthodoxy, I must say. But the orthodoxy is different from orthodoxy of Orthodox communism. And what is that? It basically reduced the scope of freedom to the productive domain, the domain of production. And therefore, but while doing so, it also talked about religious. Marx talks about religious freedom. Marx says that institutions like police may also continue. He revised his ideas. He thought that institutions can't be abolished altogether. They may be required to help society run better. One time he thought that police should disappear. Then later on he revised the idea. That he said police may be required to do duties to the poor, to help the poor, nurture their capacities. So therefore, therefore he revised his ideas. He, from abolitionist position, he moved towards a positive reconstructionist view of institutions. But those developments came very late, and therefore those developments were marginalized by Orthodox communism. And Orthodox communism didn't pay attention to early Marx, who talked about alienation in the capitalist society, alienation of human being from human being, alienation of human being from nature, alienation of human being from each other. All those forms of alienation which Marx was critical, Orthodox Marxism, Orthodox communism didn't pay attention to it, suppressed it. And as a result of this, it created a distorted image of Marx throughout the world. I will end with a joke. Then we'll discuss. Once there's a joke in Poland. Police people used to crack this joke when we were students of JNU in 1980s. So one policeman was telling another man from Poland that once Marx was asked to visit, was invited to come to Moscow. So he reappeared from his grave and went to Moscow. Then because then the comrades were trying to build a society in his name, so he was asked to visit and give assessment of it. So when he toured across Moscow, he, after completing his tour, he wanted to speak to their Moscow radio. Those days only radio, so no television channels. So he wanted to speak to radio. And the Communist Party was slightly wary of him. I said, this man is a free thinker, he may say anything against us. He already seen people gone across, now we don't know what he will speak. So let us give him, let us say no to him. No, people are busy in radio, we can't give time to speak. Then I said, please give me 1 minute time, let me speak to your people. And then they said, no, 1 minute is difficult, we give half a minute. And then he agreed. He said, okay, give me half a minute. So he said, then he said, he spoke like this. He said, excuse me, proletariat, if you can. Thank you. So that is the difference between Marx and Orthodox communism. The difference is huge. In terms of theoretical construction, Orthodox Marxism, the critical classical Marxism, evolved in time. It moved from an abolitionist perspective to a reconstructionist viewpoint. But Orthodox communism used the abolitionist viewpoint and carried that viewpoint in practical difficulties, carried practical extremities. As a result of this, it collapsed. Marx, as the police joke reveals, Marx was wary of even supporting that. This joke was there for a long time. There from 60s. There for a long time. Therefore, maybe the joke is there from 40s actually. So therefore, it reveals that those who were sympathizer of Marx, Marx ideas, Marx socialism, who were aware of his evolution of ideas over a period of time, realize that there are shifts taking place in classical Marxism, which are not well appreciated by orthodox communism. Therefore, the political flaws arising because of orthodox communism cannot be fully attributed to theoretical nature of classical Marxism, because that theory has evolved in time. Just as every theory has time, Marx's own theory has evolved in time. He has shifted, as I told you, from an evolutionist viewpoint to a reconstructionist viewpoint, to a reformist viewpoint. One that believes in reconstruction of institutions rather than one that believes in evolution of destroying institutions. He shifted his viewpoint. Therefore, he started believing the role of police in the socialist state. Started believing in religious freedom. At one time, he believed in abolition of religious freedom. Now he started believing in religious freedom to be safeguarded by socialist state. Therefore, there are shifts in his thinking, and in Orthodox communism, they try to give a unitary viewpoint to Marx theory. There is no unitary theory in Marx. The diverse theories in Marx, the diverse viewpoint perspectives in Marx. And it's important for you to understand how those ideas have matured across time. And therefore, in my view, Orthodox communism was not merely theoretically reductionist, and it also became politically repressive. As a result, it has collapsed. However, as I said, Orthodox Marxism, classical Marxism cannot be freed from blemishes. It actually had a very weak theory of freedom, and it has no understanding of institutions, no critical understanding of institutions. And one important lacuna in classical Marxism is that it has no theory of civil society. As a result, you cannot understand that without civil society, you cannot have a theory of democracy. Remember, every theory of democracy, liberal theory of democracy or Marxist theory of democracy, if it remains to be democratic, depends on their approach to civil society. John Locke is fully right when he says democracy survives only when society has civil society. Without civil society, Locke says, you will have a feudal monarchical state power, not democratic, liberal democratic state power. If state has to be liberal democratic, it must ensure the autonomy, freedom of civil society institutions. It must believe in diversities of freedom required by varieties of institutions. It must promote them. It must have a law and order machinery to promote that structure of freedom. Otherwise, you will end up in monarchical state power. Locke is very clear about that. It is important for Marxism to learn from John Locke and innovate. But problem with liberal theories, it remains uncritical of civil society. Civil society has problems. Civil society justifies inequalities, oppression. Therefore, it needs to be critique. But that critique must come from within the domains of freedom that civil society nurtures, within domains of institutions that safeguard our freedom. You can't abolish those freedoms, you can't abolish those institutions. Therefore, some feminists believe in abolition of families. This is all these abolitionist tendencies are there in the radical camp. Some feminists believe in abolition of families. Some socialists believe in abolition of state. Some socialists believe in abolition of politics. Some socialists believe in abolition of religion. political parties, so on and so forth. This evolutionist tendency must be reformed. So long as this tendency to abolish institutions is present in the socialist camp, in the feminist camp, they will remain orthodox. They will not learn from John Locke. Therefore, it is important for us to re-adopt John Locke's theory of civil society, and understand how a radical critique of capitalism can contribute and can enlighten us with various modes of democratic practices and democratic institutions. If there are problems in those democracies, you must criticize it from inside. But you can't try to abolish it. If you try to abolish it, you will create a society which is very simplistic, and people will reject that model. That's what happened to the fate of orthodox communism. Therefore, it's important for us to understand that, and therefore, a new society can come into existence only by learning critical insights from John Locke's appreciation of civil society. That appreciation of strength, that the structure of democracy critically depends on autonomous existence of civil society organizations. They must operate as a third tier between classes and the state power. They must remain independent of each other. They must provide an independent space, which is independent of class forces on the one hand and state power on the other hand. And therefore, they must represent diversities of freedom. Now, without that, you cannot have democracy. That's the important contribution of John Locke. If you are not happy with civil society, you can't think of abolishing it. Therefore, the tendency to abolish institutions which you are not happy is a dangerous idea. You must criticize, you must reform it, must alter its energy, alter its scope of operation, and grounded on a new idea, grounded on new insights. If you don't do it, you believe in abolishing institutions, you will create a dangerous scenario for democracy. So, thank you very much. Let me end here. Let us have discussion.
Thank you, sir. I think I got the sense. If I'll summarize it in one sentence, it will be like this: that Marxism, you can find a reductionist aspect of Marxism, and that reductionist aspect is that it has reduced everything to the class. It doesn't talk about civil society. It doesn't talk about freedom, and hence it doesn't talk about democracy, right? So there are many forms of exploitation. It has only talked about, and it reduced every exploitation in class term. And but there is also strength of Marxism. For example, what you said, there are theories of alienation, and there are certain reformation in the latter Marxism. But all these positive aspect of Marxism has not been taken by the orthodox communism like Lenin and Stalin. In fact, they just continue the reductionist theory from theory to practice, or in other words, what I can say, that reductionist theory was practiced by the Lenin and Stalin, and it is because of that practice they followed a model of abolition approach, or abolitionist approach. It is because of this abolitionist approach and not learning the positive aspects, especially alienation and other positive things of Marxism, this orthodox communism as practiced by the Lenin and Stalin, it got defeated and with the disintegration of the USSR. But then, sir, I'm thinking that today we are living in a capitalist system. In fact, the economy is spillovering. It is spillovering to our social, cultural, and political aspect. And today we are seeing how this logic of materialism is guiding this social relationship. And no doubt, class is there, but everything is not class oriented, right? But still, then if capitalism is a kind of thesis, then I think that Marxism is an antithesis, and there must be some tension. And reductionist, in every ism you can find there is some or other kind of reduction. But still, then how to revive Marxism from this reduction, and how to place Marxism before the capitalism, so that uh, we can lead a good life, we can create a good society, we can create a good state, right? So how to correct Marxism, and how that corrected Marxism will handle the problem of capitalism today. So that's my concern. But we have Professor Swarnamay Tripathi, Professor Gyanaranjan Swai. They can bring their some nuances from their perspective, and they can initiate this discussion. So I welcome Madam, and I welcome Jano Bhai to continue with their observation.
Yeah, Himanshu, thank you. First of all, I'm extremely grateful that you allowed me to be part of this very thought-provoking lecture. I mean, it is very, very thought-provoking because some of the important dimensions of Marxism, we have discussed. But two things. One is a special request I will make to Professor Patnaik, and the second one, I think you also said a part of it. I think the idea of Marxism. The way. The question of compatibility with modern democracy. Uh, that needs actually serious attention because, the way Marxism is taught today and the way the young generation look at the question of Marx and Marxism is that something that it is not, democracy is something that a Marxist cannot be a Democrat. This is what I feel like that. But I think, how do we make the idea? Because I think the way democracy has been organized. I don't know whether Professor Patnaik is the right person to address the issue of compatibility between democracy and Marxism. But I think also one of the ways, if anyone asks the same question to me, I would say that maybe the language of democracy has been defined by the people who are fond of capitalism. So that's why there is an understanding that Marxism is close to, democracy is close to capitalism. So I think the language of democracy, the language of Marxism, the language of democracy, who is going to define what democracy exactly means, whether democracy is a majoritarian politics or something else. There are varieties of democratic ideas that we find, but I'm a little bit confused with the whole, I find it very, very problematic, this issue of compatibility. But again, thank you to Professor Patnaik and also Himanshu for organizing this wonderful lecture. Also a special request also to Himanshu, maybe we can invite Professor Patnaik to deliver a series of lectures on, Marxism and its, literature on post-Marxist thoughts, for example, because in Odisha, I think people only know when most of the students, they only know, that the classical Marxism, some of the core ideas of classical Marxism, but the the post-Marxist thought, particularly structural Marxism, analytical Marxism. Maybe whenever Professor Patnaik has time, he can also teach us more about these kind of philosophies for our better understanding. Thank you very much once again to Himanshu and Professor Patnaik. Thank you.
Thank you, for your observation and very good suggestion also. I think I'll talk to Patnaik sir in this regard. But the point mentioned by Gyanranjan Swain, that democracy somehow it is tilting towards capitalism or liberalism or capitalism, but then it has its own problem also, right? Now, what is the appropriate understanding of democracy, or can we say that Marxism has no democracy, or in democracy, Marxist has nothing to contribute towards the concept of democracy? I think it's a very interesting question. Now, I may request Professor Swarnavai Tripathi Madam. She can give her own views. Madam, unmute Karan.
Good evening, Professor Patnaik.
Yeah.
Dr. Himanshu, you have taken a right step, because we all are confused about Marxism. I have no confusion regarding this, in the sense that when we interpret a philosopher's writings, we forget that every philosopher is a product of his own time. And what Marx visualized, at that point of time, the society was, inequality was at its peak in that society. Indifferent attitude of the rich towards poor was at its peak in that society. The state actually never responded to the needs of the people. And this was the society. That society is purely different from the present society we are living. Though we are in a neoliberal state, but people have gained consciousness so much that even a very a type of governance which is moved by a particular vested interest cannot neglect people's voices. That is why every government is moving strategically. That is why the farm law has been repealed. So number one is, we need to understand a philosopher in the context of his time, to which the philosopher has responded and has written the philosophy. Second thing is, yes, the German philosopher, the great philosopher Karl Marx, has not talked about civil society, because he was in a mood to reject the previous philosophers, all materialist philosophers, like those who talked about mechanical materialism. He wanted to reject that philosophy, and in that with that urge within himself, I feel probably he did not want to see the positive aspects of those philosophy, because the seeds of Marxism is also there in John Locke's writing. It is written in Macpherson's book Possessive Individualism. So the Marx, what I have understood little, Marx has given us a picture of a future. He has not spelled out the future, but he has given us a picture of a future where there will be no state, there will be no regulating authority, because all human beings have reached their potentials, because a repressive state is not present to regulate their activities. And Marx believed strongly that every human being is having inherent goodness, and every human being has the highest potential to realize a good life. And every human being is not at all selfish. So the concept of human nature that Marx believed in is purely different from the concept of human nature that the liberals understood, or today the neoliberals are understanding. So, in that sense, what I feel that the future of socialistic society that Marx was talking about a vibrant civil society, though he did not use the word civil society. And when Lenin, the hero of Russian Revolution, was trying to convert Marxian theory into praxis, was only fighting against the Tsarist Russia and wanted to establish by any means Marxism in Russia and wanted to integrate the whole Eurasia. So what I feel is that nobody had Lenin lived for a longer period, people would have understood Marxism in a better form. Because when I became a teacher of public administration, I found that Lenin had borrowed the ideas of Frederick Winslow Taylor, the scientific management approach, and had applied those principles to Soviet Union. So from this, when I read this, I found how, to what extent Lenin was broad-minded, not having the narrow mindset. But the things turned out differently when Lenin died and the power went to somebody else who was you can say, in a true sense of the term, an orthodox communist, who believed in a state, who believed in the, he understood Marx in a very different way, and thought dictatorship of proletariat means the state should behave like a black box where nothing would come out of this. People will, whoever will raise their voice will be punished. And that practice is continuing with communist states even today. This has been practiced in China also. Though Mao Zedong was critical of Stalin, but see, the person who talked about the infection, the COVID virus, was punished. So the followers of those who loved Marxism, they did not like Lenin. He did not get the time to interpret Marxism in a proper way. But however, we find it's Marxism. We find a better interpretation of Marxism in the writings of neo-Marxism, that is Gramsci, because Gramsci lived in a different world and different period. Like today, we are not able to understand Gandhi's Gram Swaraj, because Gandhi had never visualized how the neoliberal state would behave, because Gandhi was just negotiating with a liberal state, a liberal democratic state, so where he was experiencing a very, very vibrant civil society during a times of crisis. So thank you, Professor Patnaik, for initiating, provoking our thoughts. I could get the chance to speak out, and I would advise Dr. Himanshu to have a series of lectures on this issue by Professor Patnaik, so that the evening becomes very, very vibrant. Thank you, Dr. Himanshu, for giving me this chance to share my thoughts.
Oh, thank you, madam. I think I will talk to Patnaik sir regarding this. It's all about, time and his health, and he's always interested to talk and speak to us. And let me make it very clear that, this talk is actually part of my classroom lecture. So it's not a very formal kind of invitation to him. And I think I know my teacher. I know that, whether it is formal or informal, if there is something for learning, something for, teaching, then Patnaik sir is always there. And I think that he will not deny the proposal of, madam and Gyano bhai. But it's all about his health. I have to a little bit concerned about his health. So I think, Patnaik sir, you want to respond to this, kind of feedback or observation by three of us?
No, the first question is compatibility between Marxism and democracy. It's true that Ghana said quite polemically, the people basically mean Marxist. If you are a Marxist, you are not democratic. You are not you don't believe in democracy. You are undemocratic, which is what we in India have experienced. The communist parties and Marxist intellectuals everywhere, they show greater degree of intolerance to a different point of view. So democratic thinking is all about what? About openness to your limits. If you are not open-minded about your limits, if you think you know everything, and everything is encompassed by a theory or an ideological framework you subscribe to, however systematic, however elaborate that framework may be, the moment you think you have a complete framework, you are undemocratic. State matter ends there. That's exactly where John Locke is right, saying that a philosopher must have skeptical belief of his or her knowledge. If you think you already know everything, then where is need for debate and discussion? You are simply coming to propagate before me or before you. Suppose I go on propagating to you what I believe, then where is dialogue between me and all of you here? So there should be an element of this is what is missing in Marx and down the line. Almost all Marxists have a tendency to claim that they know everything. Therefore, this culture of intolerance comes from this epistemological belief that your knowledge has a primacy over any other knowledge. Once you believe that your knowledge has a primacy or supremacy over any other form of knowledge, you are undemocratic. You are not with Locke's essay on human understanding, where Locke says quite unambiguously, democratic thinking is about a philosophical knowledge admitting its limits, and therefore giving scope for skeptical thinking that what you know today may be refuted by others tomorrow or may be refuted by somebody else right now. That skeptical thinking is that you know something, yet you don't know many things. So what you know may not be true as well for the next moment when you are trying to express your viewpoint. Somebody else may challenge it, or next generation may come out with new evidence of knowing things, same thing better. Therefore, this scope is not there. This framework is not there in Marx and entire body of Marxism. And here I'm, though I'm sympathetic of Gramsci, I'm critical of him as well. So therefore, you find the entire body of Marxism suffers from a major deficit, what I call undemocratic thinking. Now, within that framework, I'm not saying, therefore, what Ghana was saying, to be a Marxist is supposed to be not with democracy. That is true, but that is only true for the form of Marxism that has evolved over a period of time. But it doesn't mean that, therefore, that's why socialism has been continuously questioning this kind of Marxism. The liberal orientation of socialism has been questioning this Marxism for a long time, and they are not defenders of capitalism either. But I agree with this liberal socialist thinking, which questions the ideological supremacy of Marxism. I agree with that. Therefore, to some extent, in my view, if you are with a typical Marxism, you are against democracy. The democracy is about thinking, first of all, not defending your right to speak. Everybody has right to speak. Marxists also have right to speak. But democracy is about thinking. If that thinking process doesn't acknowledge that your thinking has limitation at any point of time, and therefore others may add, others may improve, others may rectify, or rectify right now or rectify next time around. If that scope is not there in your knowledge framework, then your knowledge that you produce is very undemocratic. That's simple point made by John Locke long back in 17th century England is a very, very powerful point. And therefore, every knowledge seeker must be skeptical. This is a point made by Gautam Buddha as well. Therefore, there is a ancient wisdom in our ancient wisdom in India. You find such forms of wisdom. It is important for us to get back to that form of knowledge. Knowledge production process must be democratic primarily. In my view, democracy lies in knowledge production. We are seeking knowledge. We must produce knowledge in a way which helps me to rectify my knowledge that I produce here. Therefore, second point, Gyana was saying democracy is seen in a connection with capitalism. It's true that capitalism produces one kind of democracy. But as I told you, that democracy of, for example, look at John Locke. John Locke theory of human rights is not simply rights of property owners. That theory of human rights talks about right to life of everybody, including the laborers, including women, including slaves, and also talks about right to liberty for everybody, and talks about right to property for everybody. The property for him also includes work. But point is that idea is not practiced by capitalism as well. Here is a ideologue of capitalism whose ideology is not practiced by capitalism. So that inconsistency, the contradiction between theory of human rights developed by the founding father of human rights and the liberal founding father of human rights and the liberal state is necessary for us to understand. Therefore, human life is essentially a bundle of contradictions. So, in Locke's theoretical framework, there are contradictions between his notion of human rights meant for everybody and the way human rights operate in actual life, which are not enjoyed by everybody. Therefore, there is the universal claim to human rights and the particular enjoyment of human rights. There is a contradiction between these two. And therefore, Locke, faced with contradiction, said that maybe there is a contradiction in my formulation. Next generation should debate and discuss and offer a solution. This skepticism is necessary for Marxism to learn from Locke. Marxism, there is nothing in Marxism to offer like this, I am telling you. What John Locke says, that there is a contradiction in my theory, and next generation may rectify my problems, which I am not able to solve myself. Nothing of this kind is offered by any Marxist of this world. Nothing of this kind. And we have not learned anything from John Locke in the left camp. Not merely Marxism, I bring all varieties of leftism, feminism, Ambedkarism, the varieties of social. They have this arrogance about themselves. Unless this self-arrogance is curbed by our thinking process, the way we produce our knowledge, we don't curb that arrogance. We don't develop democratic thinking. We cannot. Therefore, that's my first submission. Second point, Gyana was saying that if you see the democratic current has also evolved not merely in connection. Democratic current has evolved by challenging capitalism. Over a period of time, capitalism has showed resilience to accommodate those rights which have come from working class. How can you say liberal democracy is entirely developed by the capitalist class? Even as universal suffrage developed by capitalist class. Universal suffrage, basic human right of today's world, is a gift of working class struggle. The capitalist class didn't fight for universal adult suffrage. And this orthodox communism simply glossed over that contribution, simply equated democracy with capitalism. How can you simply equate democracy with capitalism? How can you simply attach democracy with capitalism? One of the basic elementary principle of democracy, the universal adult suffrage, is a contribution of socialist forms of battles led by working class in 19th century Europe. Marx says quite clearly, by welcoming universal, at that time, not universal suffrage, but the universal male suffrage. Marx welcomed that. Universal adult suffrage was not there, universal male suffrage around 1850. The Chartist movement was led by them. Therefore, it is important for you to understand that democratic currents evolved over a period of time through working class efforts, working class initiative, and therefore their questions must be questions of a socialist who believes in democracy, who talks about democracy. This is where again orthodox communism is weak. It simply I-washed, simply whitewashed the entire socialist legacy in expanding democracy under capitalism, and simply locks up democracy with capitalism, which is in my view a erroneous formulation. Democracy cannot be simply locked up with capitalism. History of democracy indicates clearly it has been initiated by non-capitalist forces challenging capitalism. They initiated democracy. Is capitalism has shown resilience in adopting them. That's a different point of view. They try to abuse it, try to manipulate it, try to subvert it from within, but they accommodated that demand over a long period. It happened through a series of struggles. It didn't happen automatically. Universal adult suffrage, which we are enjoying today, automatically came through series of sacrifices made by working class. Therefore, it is important for us to understand that democracy cannot be locked up with capitalism. That's an important submission I make. And this is where the Leninist framework failed to highlight this point. And Lenin himself says unambiguously that about entire human rights I was. That's not true. That formulation is flawed, in my view. Therefore, do not attach democracy with capitalism. Even the elementary universal adult suffrage, which is the political democracy, do not attach with capitalism. That's my submission. Therefore, the interesting text here, but as I told you, one of the important principles of knowledge formation, which is there in liberal theory, must be absorbed by a socialist legacy, which offers a radical critique of capitalism, must be willing to admit its limitations and should be skeptical in arguing for his own truth, unless it inherits this tendency from John Locke and liberalize its own philosophical trajectory of emancipation. In my view, Marxism, Ambedkarism, feminism will remain very, very intolerant philosophies. Therefore, they will be challenged by us. They will be questioned by us, and I will question all of these definitely. Therefore, it is important for you to profess limits of your knowledge, while firmly believing in emancipation or enlargement of empowerment or enlargement of freedom. I believe in that. I support, therefore, I believe in Marxism, feminism, Ambedkarism, that their goal to empower the disempowered people, the goal to expand domain of freedom, expand democratic domains for them. I agree with that view, but I do not agree with the tendency to claim that you know everything, and others don't know anything. This is a tendency which is quite present in Marxism, feminism, and Ambedkarism. Must go. Only then democratic thinking is possible. In order to defend democracy, your thinking process must be democratic. Otherwise, you will be living in Locke's paradox. Locke himself said, my formulations are full of paradoxes. Therefore, the paradox will hunt all of us. It's important for us to reformulate, reposition while offering critique of capitalism.
Thank you, sir. I hope Janabhai would have got some clarity on his questions. What it's all about, intellectualization. It's a continuous process, and maybe he will bring some other,
Can I ask one question to Professor Patnaik?
Please, madam.
I just wanted to know, for my knowledge, that when Marx talked about universal adult male suffrage, did he ever become critical of excluding women from political rights?
No, I don't think. That question was not there in his time. You can't blame him for that. But
No, we
of course,
cannot blame him, but
few
did he
intellectuals talked about.
ever did he ever write about anywhere in the writing? Because
I don't think. I know. I don't think he wrote.
okay, okay.
Mm.
So I think, thank you, sir. I mean, vote of thanks, I think it is not required, though I have
No, no.
requested, ज्ञान भाई को रिक्वेस्ट करते कि vote of thanks दबा पाए जदि से भी आपन को स्टूडेंट तेणु से जदि vote of thanks देवे आई विल बी वेरी हैप्पी. Janai, are you there?
Hello, just a second.
So thank you, sir. I mean, we will come. Yeah.
First of all, no, I was about to travel, sir. So now I am fine, sir. I have just parked my vehicle. Actually, it was such a wonderful lecture. I planned to leave it by 6:45. I told Himanshu, but it was so exciting that compelled me to listen fully the lecture. So first of all, I'm extremely grateful to Professor Patnaik for giving his valuable time to speak on such an important topic, and why I consider lectures on Marxism to be very important. I mean, the reason probably is not whether we should. The point is, as political science students, everybody should know the language of Marxism and most of the recent studies of Marxism. What I find today in most of the political science students in Odisha is that Marxism is not a very interesting chapter. And people only read some bits and pieces of Marxist literature, and for example, like what is alienation, what is surplus value, dialectical materialism, historical material. I think apart from these ideas, I don't think also we as also teachers also don't teach them anything new. So I think so this lecture actually is a new beginning. If at all Dr. Himanshu can organize such lectures, it will be a very, very thought-provoking idea, and the students will be immensely benefited by such kind of lectures. And nobody is better than Professor Patnaik as far as any discussion on Marxism takes place. So thank you to Professor Patnaik for giving his valuable time, and also Professor Swarnamay Tripathi, who also is a very popular teacher in Utkal University and throughout Odisha. And also special thanks to Dr. Himanshu for organizing this wonderful talk. I have seen how he actually organizes many important talks. Some of the talks I also miss, but I actually I am fortunate that I could attend this. So thank you again, Himanshu, for organizing this. And also the students, I would request all the students never miss such kind of lectures, because I think, if you miss these kind of lectures, probably you are going to miss something very important in your life. So this is again a special request to all the student community, student friends, to be very, very attentive and make yourself available for such kind of lectures. Thank you, sir, and thank you, Himanshu, for organizing this talk. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gyana Bhai. You are always a source of inspiration for me, and I have had on you that you will continue to be academic person. You may lead this generation, right? So I think in that way. So thank you, sir. Thank you all students for participation, and thank you, Gyana Bhai, for your vote of thanks. So thank you all. So good night and namaste.
Acha, Himanshu
Madam,
bhai,
happy ko.
why we call it as vote of thanks? I have a why we call it vote of thanks? Sir, Arun sir will
Take it
tell us
from
why it is called as vote of thanks.
ask Himanshu.
I'll talk with you later.
No. I'm saying, is it a democratic invention? Vote of thanks.
I think I
It is
need to
formal.
think,
No,
then
no,
I'll
no.
reply to you.
I mean, casual note. I said, don't take it seriously.
No. So I'm stop recording, sir, right?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And also Himanshu, I think, sir, ଆପଣ ବି ଟିକେ ସମୟ ଦିଅନ୍ତୁ ଟିକେ sir ଆମ ମାନଙ୍କୁ